Mankind's journey to colonize the stars is a story that stretches back over a millennium. Some 1,000 years prior, our ancestors in the 20th century were locked in a nuclear standoff between two superpowers. Each side searched for ways to gain the upper hand, leading them inexorably to look to the heavens. The space race saw humanity slip the surly bonds of Earth and take our first tentative steps towards the next phase in our evolution, what some poetically refer to as Homo Stellaris. History has taught us that whatever new frontiers people explore, we cannot help but bring our warlike nature with us. So it was with space. Under President Reagan, the United States of America launched Excalibur anti-missile satellites into orbit, forming the first link in the Strategic Defense Initiative. These laser batteries could strike at intercontinental ballistic missiles in flight, rendering the enormous nuclear stockpiles of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics ineffective. Some have argued that this advancement precipitated the collapse of the Soviet Union on January 11, 1988, ending the Cold War. The reformed Republic of Russia under Premier Gorbachev at first worked to de-escalate tensions with their NATO rivals, leading both sides to begin scaling back on their exorbitant defense budgets. Unfortunately, this thawing in the relationship between old enemies lasted only a few short years before a crippling recession brought on by Russia's failed transition to capitalism opened the door for a conservative communist faction to seize power in 1997, re-establishing the USSR and restarting the Cold War. Discourse within the United Nations spiraled downwards from there. In anticipation of future conflict, NATO and their allies Japan developed Krippen Station, a 1.5 kilometer long orbital command center that would far surpass the size and capabilities of its Soviet counterpart. The first components were launched in 2005, and within 2 years, Krippen had become the centerpiece of the rechristened Western Orbital Defense Network. By this time, the complete collapse of the Soviet Union's economy had shifted the political landscape considerably. In 2004, a more liberal Premier Tikhonov rose to power on a platform of repairing the USSR's dire economic situation by carefully opening its doors to the West. His efforts culminated in the signing of the landmark Tikhonov Accords on January 14, 2011, which would see the struggling nation receive financial aid from America. In a cruel twist of fate, just 4 hours after signing the historic document, the Premier and his family were assassinated by an extremist, plunging the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics into chaos. Regions that had long sought freedom from the regime were quick to take advantage. The Ukrainian People's Republic declared themselves independent on March 3rd, with Czechoslovakia and East Germany following their lead 2 weeks later. Poland tried to do the same, but the fracturing military ruthlessly stamped out the uprising. Admiral Tarantov of the KGB imposed martial law, hoping to prevent an outbreak of hostilities, but the Soviet Union's violent breakup was unavoidable. A bloody three-way civil war between the liberals, conservatives, and secessionists ensued, and the countries of the Warsaw Pact were engulfed in flames. By the end of 2013, the tide was turning against the old guard. Defeats at Leningrad, Minsk, and Moscow had robbed them of their strength, with worse to come in the new year. That January, President Giuliani ordered NATO to intervene. In Europe, ground troops moved to assist Czechoslovakia and Poland, while ships traversed the frozen Arctic waters to secure a beachhead on the Kola Peninsula. The Pacific Fleet anchored itself off Vladivostok, but this brought them into conflict with their ally Japan, a nation which was trying to assert its own dominance in the region. A brief engagement saw NATO emerge victorious, but their relationship with the Japanese people was perhaps irreparably tarnished. Another task force moved up the Baltic Sea, engaging the Soviet Navy off the coast of Latvia. This prompted a desperate nuclear retaliation from Soviet hardliners, launching an array of missiles at East and West Germany. Thankfully, Woden was able to intercept and destroy the warheads in flight, but this only prompted the last Soviet Army division to instead target those they could reach. The city of Riga, a stronghold of the liberal faction, was blanketed with chemical weapons, killing many hundreds of thousands. This abhorrent act of petty retribution shattered any remaining support the Old Guard had, and by March, the war had come to an end. Over 15 million had been killed. In the aftermath of this brutal conflict, Prime Minister Johnson of the United Kingdom advocated for a strengthening of the partnership between Western allies through the integration of the European Common Market and the Free Trade Zone of the Americas. Heads of state converged on Berlin to discuss this possibility. After months of deliberation, an agreement was reached, leading to the formation of the Western Alliance. Soviet leaders met at Kiev to discuss their own future. The USSR was divided up into 7 new states, but all concurred that closer ties to the West would be beneficial. The nascent alliance agreed to accept all 7 after a 10-year probationary period. The United States of America at first refrained from joining. They believed that the smaller, less affluent nations had been granted a disproportionate level of control in the new Geneva-based government, a concession that the USA criticized heavily. Nevertheless, the economic benefits could not long be ignored. They too joined in 2015. Soon after its formation, the Western Alliance began looking for a way to celebrate their historic union through the pursuit of scientific achievement. They would collaborate together to do what no one else had managed before: sending a man to Mars. The Alliance Space Command was formed in January 2016, and already by December had established a permanent headquarters on the lunar surface, with orbiting manufacturing facilities overhead. The ability to construct and launch spacecraft directly from the moon would allow any new design to bypass the costly fuel burn required to escape Earth's atmosphere, extending its range significantly. 4 ships were commissioned and built over the next 2 years, with the first ready to launch by July 2017. AS Altair and her 6-man crew departed for the Red Planet, with AS Procyon following on in August as support or rescue if needed. After a 6-month journey, the 2 craft arrived at Mars early in the new year, to much acclaim. Before the return voyage had even taken place, Krippen Station was launching other unmanned probes to explore the asteroid belt and Jovian moons. These successes inspired commercial interests to invest in their own scientific pursuits, hopeful that they would result in profitable advanced technologies. No field of study saw greater focus than the effort to create a functional fusion reactor. A collaborative effort between several universities, the California Research Design Team, worked together to solve some of the problems that had prevented any prior attempts from being able to generate more power than they had consumed in operation. Their efforts bore fruit in June 2018, at which point General Motors stepped in to fund further development. In 2020, their investments paid off when a team of scientists from Harvard and MIT became the first to achieve sustained net positive energy production from their reactor. This development could potentially solve the world's energy needs and catapult mankind towards new discoveries. GM patented the design the next year, with the first industrial fusion power plants following soon after. 1 month after the Californian think tank made its initial breakthrough on the technology, 2 scientists working at Stanford University observed an anomaly in the data that seemingly contradicted physics as they were then understood. These 2 individuals were Thomas Kearny and Takeyoshi Fuchida. They conjectured that the speed of light was not the hard limit it was believed to be, and that subatomic particles could, with enough energy, bypass it altogether by moving through hyperdimensional space. In late 2018, they published their hypothesis, but few took notice. There was no feasible way to harness the kind of power it would require to conduct the experiments they wanted to carry out, not without several further breakthroughs in fusion technology. 3 more increasingly far-fetched papers followed in successive years, but all they won for their efforts was the disdain and ignominy of their peers. The 2 nuclear engineers would ultimately retire from the field altogether. They and their research would fade into obscurity. The Western Alliance evolved quickly in its first few years. What initially was intended as a purely economic union soon became one of mutual defense. While the member states retained their individual militaries, NATO had been dissolved, and in its place rose the Western Alliance Armed Forces, a centralized command answering solely to the Geneva government. At the time of the fusion breakthrough, it had already far outstripped its predecessors in scope, incorporating the territories of not just the defunct NATO and Warsaw Pact, but more distant states as well. In 2019, India made the historic decision to enter into the coalition. This last act threatened to destabilize the delicate balance between nations in the early 21st century. With India to their southwest and the former USSR set to join the Western Alliance within the next few years, China was looking increasingly boxed in. In 2022, they, alongside the Hong Kong Collective and United Korea, formed a counterweight to what they saw as Western encroachment on their territory, in the form of the Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. Relations between the two became increasingly hostile. They even threatened to seize control of the mining outposts in frozen Antarctica that were crippling the value of their mineral exports. In an effort to avoid a full encirclement, the ACPS aggressively lobbied Japan, the planet's third largest economy, to join in their vision of Pan-Asianism. When support was not immediately forthcoming, radical elements of the Chinese government pushed for a complete blockade of the island nation. The dubious justification for this was to keep the Western Alliance armed forces out. Against better judgment, the operation went ahead in January 2023. It proved to be a major strategic blunder that backfired spectacularly. The United States of America transferred all of their military personnel stationed within Japan over to the WAAF. Beginning in April, these troops would assist in airlifting supplies over to the archipelago. Despite these efforts, the hardships brought on by the blockade led to food shortages, and the government's refusal to deploy the Japanese Defense Force and start a war led to their own downfall, necessitating the Imperial House to take emergency control of the realm. Relief convoys were dispatched from Pearl Harbor in May to ease the burden, but as soon as they approached the blockade, they were fired upon, forcing them to turn back. Subsequent efforts would receive a naval escort. Disaster struck when the Chinese cruiser Ironflower inadvertently collided with USS Bremerton and then opened fire on the stricken vessel. A pair of Japanese destroyers swiftly raced to intervene, but were themselves fired upon. In the ensuing engagement, Akagi, Bremerton, and Ironflower were all sunk, which collapsed any remaining support for the Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere among the Japanese people, and prompted swift retaliatory strikes by the JDF around Tokyo, clearing a passage for the relief convoys to reach them. Before the situation could escalate any further, Japanese diplomats invited their counterparts from both sides to a meeting on their neutral soil. Over the next year, they hammered out what would become known as the Osaka Agreement, which saw themselves, the Free Russian States, and the ACPS minus the Hong Kong Collective join the Western Alliance in 2024. This did not happen without concessions. China argued for greater autonomy in handling internal affairs and freedom to pursue their objectives in Southeast Asia. They found unexpected allies in the US and Japan as the three industrial giants pushed for the larger economies to have more influence at Geneva. This subtle shift in power in favor of the wealthiest nations created the first hairline fractures in what had until this point been a strongly united organization. The aftershocks of this would follow mankind centuries into the future. For some time now, I've been talking about the issues I've got with the earliest videos I produced in the BattleTech Lore and History series. Now, this August marked the 3-year anniversary of me doing this, and I think I've progressed quite a bit in that time. The problem I have, though, is that because I've done a chronological telling of the history, my oldest videos are the very first ones you're going to see if you're watching from the beginning. And I don't think that's the best first impression. Now, I've been teasing a new mini-series for a little while now, and as you've seen today in this first chapter, it is going to be focused on the history of the Terran Alliance. However, back when I told this story the first time, I raced through it. I hadn't quite developed my style to the point that I have now. And there was a lot that went unsaid. 10 minutes was all it took that first time around. This one I think is going to take closer to an hour and a half. I don't know if it was my intention when I started to have this first chapter cover the 40 years of real-life history that BattleTech has existed for, 1984 to 2024. But this felt like a natural point to end the first chapter at. Next time, we're going to look at the rest of the 21st century. There are some major technological breakthroughs during that time, starting with the invention of the nuclear-powered rocket, and then later on, the development of the Kearny Fuchida drive. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because on Earth there are some serious problems that are going to plague the Western Alliance and its successor, the Terran Alliance, for the rest of this century. Hopefully that'll be of interest to you and you'll enjoy the rest of this Terran Alliance series. I know it's so early in the setting that a lot of the features that we've come to know and love don't even exist yet and won't appear for centuries, so it's a little bit different to what we normally talk about. But like I said, there's more known about the first 3 centuries of BattleTech history than I think people realize, and it will be good to explore some of that a bit more thoroughly than we have in the past. The plan is to try and get out the whole thing in August. It might run over a little bit, but I guess we'll see as we go. I know folks are eager to see the third succession will continue. We'll be getting back to that as soon as this one is concluded. If you did enjoy the video today, be sure to give it a like. You can leave me a comment below. I'll try to respond to as many of those as I can. You can share the video around with other people who have an interest in BattleTech. Doing all those things there really helps the YouTube algorithm promote it to other people who are already on the platform, which helps grow the channel, which in turn allows me to invest more time in producing these videos, which gets them out sooner. If you're interested, there is a link to my Patreon in the video description. I try to get my videos posted there as soon as they are concluded, ahead of the YouTube premieres. Either way, thank you very much for watching, guys, and I hope to see you soon for the second chapter in this mini-series, Pax Terrana.